how should we manage the EOSIO token contract, which has since the beginning supported multiple tokens. However, only the owner of the contract can issue any other types of tokens, which would be the EOS block producers. And what I'm proposing is that we create a system to allow people to leverage that functionality by allocating premium symbol names. And when you allocate the premium symbol names, these are like three-letter symbols, four-letter symbols, five-letter symbols. Then you can have your token managed by the EOSIO token contract. The benefit of having your token managed by EOSIO token contract is you inherit all the governance powers of the EOS blockchain through the elected block producers. Your token will be compatible with all other tokens. It will be upgraded with new features as the network adds new features, such as pay to key, which would allow Bitcoin-style transactions. It will allow us to do contract pays, which would allow you to transfer tokens without having to buy RAM or CPU or net. And if you build in the liquidity through automatic market makers like Bancor, then you can transfer any token and have the fees paid in EOS by doing the translation right in the same contract. So there's lots of value in doing this. It's already expensive to create your own contract. You have to consume a lot of RAM. Then you have to manage the contract by having keys to it. So you have to secure the contract. And then you have to update it anytime there's security fixes. And what a lot of people are doing is not just taking the standard contract and deploying it on their own account so they can manage it. They're changing the code inside there and integrating it with the code of their own application. This commingling of token management, which needs to carefully control inflation rates and supply and prevent various attacks. Commingling that with whatever new and innovative app someone is building is mixing concerns. So it's not a really solid design, even though I guess the easier design. And then we're finding one other constraint that anyone building a complex app is realizing is your WebAssembly gets bigger and bigger and bigger. And there's a maximum size your WebAssembly can get, which is about the size of a block, which is, I believe, about 1 megabyte. By having your token managed in another contract, you don't have to replicate all of the code for managing your token and all the new features we can add to the tokens, such as contract pays and pay to key, because that code lives someplace else, and you can just focus on what you need to do and what makes your app special. And then everyone who's using your app and your token knows your monetary policy, knows the monetary limits, and knows only the block producers can change those properties of the token you're using. So all those things are reasons why I believe having network provided and secured and managed and governed token contract is key. And as soon as you have a network managed token contract, you have a symbol space or a namespace for symbols that needs to be allocated. And so the challenge with allocating that is getting it to the right people. The definition of right people is subjective. In many cases, people are already using it, and so by convention, certain symbols are allocated to certain people. And I've been reading the conversations, and I've observed all of the concerns about price. It's going to be expensive for developers. Yes, it's a new type of expense. We want it to have low price, right? Where you can just get it quickly, secure your symbol, go, and not have to pay a whole lot. The problem is there is a value to these symbols that I don't know the precise value. I just know that the market knows. And if we attempt to sell token symbols or allocate token symbols at a cost below the market clearing price, then speculators will come, buy them up, and then they'll resell them at high prices and get the profit. Either way, the symbols will be unavailable at reasonable prices. It's just who profits, the EOS network or speculators who come in and buy up all the 3-letter symbols, or they go on CoinMarketCap and they look at all the token symbols and they just start buying everything under the sun, just in case they want to do that. I've also seen the concerns people have expressed that, well, scammers will come and bid up the names, or bid up the symbols, right? They'll try to get the BTC and the ETH or the like, and that's a problem. The good guys need to be willing to pay more than the bad guys if you're going to actually rely on these symbols for any type of brand value or security value. So that's my long-winded introduction into why I think we need to do the things I proposed in my Medium blog post. And I'm open to hearing any other feedback the community has.
A lot of talking in the keyboard chat, so now's a good time to ask those questions. I also just want to point out that we get the same feedback for the ENF also. Everyone wants to be involved in the process. This is the process. This is how it begins. It begins with a conversation. You share an idea publicly, and like it's great to have thoughtful debate, but like some people are kind of just like raging out a little bit too much, I think. And I think having these voice chats are going to be a lot more civilized. But just so everyone knows, like I saw like the 5,000 EOS is like, people keep repeating that. I don't think Dan necessarily even, he can correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't know if he came up with that number on the spot or if it was like well thought out. Like that's not set in stone. Everything being talked about today is iterative, and this is the feedback process. We are including the ENF and Dan's team separately and together in a lot of ways, are opening up communication with the feedback as we're innovating out in the open. So that's what we're trying to do. People don't like when things just get built and then deployed with no conversation. This is the conversation. This is the opportunity to have that conversation. So just wanted to bring that up before the questions start coming in, but floor is open to anyone.
Yeah, I'd like to confirm that I made that 5,000 number up on the spot, and it was based on a principle that it should be a high number, but not too high. That if it's going to auction for less than that, you buy it in the auction. And if you think that someone's going to bid way more than that, and it's worthwhile to prevent other people from coming in and bidding up something really high, you should go ahead and pay the price there, and it's a risk reward. Why does it need to be that high? Because every single choice, every single exception or special case has a governance cost to the EOS network. The EOS Network Foundation, my team, the people writing the code, have to hand code and specify these specific tokens in the list. And then we have to justify, why did these guys get special treatment and not other guys, right? And different people are complaining. So if you want an exception to the auction rule, it should probably be a pretty high price, so that people who didn't get the exception say, well, I wouldn't pay that high price anyway. So I didn't, so it's trying to balance that. So I think exceptions and special treatment needs to be compensated, especially because you're getting a benefit. You're getting value from the network. You're getting value from the community in that special treatment. And it's going to take how many hours and how many people on Telegram arguing about which tokens are are worthwhile and who has first claim, and which tokens are legitimate, what is actual usage versus not actual usage. So there's just a whole lot of cost associated with making any special case handling, and that's why I think everything should be an auction, as much as I would love to reserve some for special cases. I could see an argument for taking the top 20 coins on CoinMarketCap and reserving those and setting those all to a very high price if someone wants to get them, which would basically take them off the market so no one can get them. But who knows? Maybe someone has a business where they want to bridge Bitcoin into the EOS network, and so they want to buy the BTC symbol, and they really value the BTC symbol for that purpose. I think it's a very high value symbol, and it should be auctioned to someone who has a business case for it and wants the quote legitimacy that comes from having your token governed by the EOS block producers, as opposed to being governed by some other multi-sig, by some other group that isn't elected. Perhaps when Eden 2.0 matures, or maybe even Eden 1.0, you can have a governance process for controlling the a token contract, and people can choose to use that DAC or DAO to govern the token so people can trust it. But that's a business model in its own right. So I think there's a lot of value in having the token and the liquidity provided by the EOS network, so that DACs don't have to get into that legal gray areas associated with hosting the market makers themselves.
So a lot of debate was coming up over the fees, what it should cost. Where would the fees go, the profit? So you mentioned a Pixel Master like auction where the previous bidder would get some of, they'd kind of get a return on their bid from the next bidder. How much revenue would be left over that would go back to the network? And if it went back to the network, is that even a correct statement? Would it go to Rex? Would it be burned? Like, what are your thoughts on that?
There's a number of options. Option one is it 60% goes and is burned. Option two is it goes and funds the liquidity in that particular token relative to EOS, which has provides value all around. So the token holder, even though they're bidding a high price for it, they are getting liquidity for their token, which is something that is of value to the token holder as well. So from that perspective, there's not a whole lot of loss associated with the process. And if everyone knows, if you are an ESIO token and it's going to be more liquid because of the market maker and the name bidding process that seeded it, that there might be additional liquidity that comes after that, but having some base liquidity for all tokens lets people know that they're probably more valuable than tokens without liquidity, or where you don't know where to get the liquidity.
So in other words, under this model, like using that 5,000 EOS number, which you said earlier was kind of arbitrary in the moment, just to give it value, that 5,000 EOS wouldn't really be wasted. It would be bootstrapping liquidity for that particular token.
Correct.
So I want to buy the ZAC name space for the ZAC symbol, and I'm willing to pay 5,000 EOS. I'm not necessarily losing that 5,000 EOS. Once again, an arbitrary number for right now. It would actually, a nice chunk of that, less any fees or whatever, would be going into a liquidity pool against the ZAC token. And as the creator of the ZAC token, I guess I would control the initial supply. So what would stop me from just getting a lot of my EOS back from just dumping my own token into the liquidity pool?
Well, that's going to require more thought because I originally just thought that the tokens would be burned and then the EOS network would allocate inflation to subsidize particular sub-communities, such as Eden. But that, there are options available here on where the money goes. What we're trying to do is figure out, well, there's a scarcity, like who gets priority over the ZAC name, right? There's many ZACs out there.
So like, let's say you implement this thing and it gets deployed one day. And if I'm really fast, if I do a transaction 1 second after you deploy the code, I can get basically every name on EOS. I can get Box, I can get DFS, I can get DAP, I can get everything. So how would you avoid that?
That's avoided in the paper the same way name bids are. There's only one symbol, one 3-letter symbol allocated per week. And there's one 4-letter every 3 days. And there's one 5-letter every day. And there's one, you can get as many 6 letters as you want. So those can be allocated very quickly, just like an eBay auction. They're all happening in parallel. So yeah, you can't, it doesn't matter how fast you are, you can't get a monopoly on everything. The most valuable symbols will be allocated first, and the less valuable ones will have to wait their time in line to be allocated, which means...
But it's basically first come, first serve, right? If I do the transaction like the second you deploy it, then it's mine, right? The first name.
No, it's not
Why not?
yours.
If I pay 5,000 EOS for it.
Oh, no. The 5,000 EOS would be to have it hard coded and managed so that no one else can get it, and would vet that.
Yeah, exactly. So if I pay 5,000
a
EOS for a symbol, then it's mine automatically. I don't have to auction for it.
No, it's not yours automatically. The proposal of that fixed, I'm not going to do anything fixed price, because anything fixed price can have somebody come in and buy them all up.
Yes, let's not talk about the price. Let's talk about how does this work? Like you reserve it for yourself or what?
If you want to reserve a symbol, you start a bid. If you're the highest bid of all symbols for a whole week, then it's yours.
And then
if you assuming we're talking about 3-letter symbols,
where does the 5,000 EOS fee come in?
That comes in if you want the EOS Network Foundation and the block producers to pre-approve a specific owner for the token before auction. So basically, if you don't want it to be up to auction, if you want it to make sure that, let's say, Violet Garden VIO token goes to Violet Garden and to no one else, and there's no auction, then we would hard code it into the code that Violet Garden gets that symbol.
So this is before deployment of the...
This is before feature. Deployment, yes.
Okay, I get it.
So how is this any different than the name bidding process, minus the ability to buy them before deployment? And we saw that doesn't work very well.
One difference is it combines a little bit of gamification, like we have with Pixel Master, like voice attempted, like Violet Garden is doing, which incentivizes people to speculate and help achieve a fair market value. We're trying to maximize the value we can generate for these names, because the more valuable these names are, the more value accrues to EOS, and the less likely that people that don't have legitimate business plans would bother to issue a high value token. They'd go through one of the other systems, right? There can be multiple token contracts, so it can be .com, .net, whatnot. But there's only one EOSIO.token. And the block producers, I suppose, could have managed multiple, and people have to say, well, which TLD do I want to be on? Which one has the most liquidity, right? Because there's Bancor relays in one, and which contract you put yours on might determine how much you're willing to pay for the symbol, and there's all kinds of other dynamics that impact the value of a symbol on a particular contract. So I lost my train of thought. So if I didn't answer your question, ask for clarification.
No, that's fine. I think my biggest reservation of this whole idea is the fact that even with 5,000 EOS being an arbitrary number, we are creating a system where we expect all these existing devs who have supported the network for 3+ years through crypto winter and all the awful market, to just buy into this system, like no matter what it costs. And you just said it should cost something high. So
here's my solution to that. We've got Eden, we've got Helios, we've got EOS Network Foundation. If someone wants to have their token reserved, they can ask for funding, and they can get reimbursed by any of these organizations for the cost of their token. And that's
that's
better
like,
way
of
of
betting on their
achieving.
generosity, though. That's not
I'm right here on the
real
call.
solution. That's maybe a case-by-case thing.
So
Sorry,
any existing project with an existing community and an existing token, let's say DeFi box, IQ, DAP, all the tokens that have existed, like there will be a process. I don't know what that process will be, but after all the conversations today, any project that existed before this blog post came out will have a pretty good chance at having some kind of application process to kind of be grandfathered in. If you launched your token after the blog post came out and it's all on chain, then you probably wouldn't get that same generosity. So we'll come up with these processes. If this is something that the network wants, then DNF, Eden, maybe Helios, even Pomelo could all be different options to make this happen. So I want to make that very clear. And I talked to Eve about this earlier. He's on board also. So
yeah, one of the things that makes a lot of sense to me is to keep the contract simple. The price will be what the price will be, and allow the community to reimburse those who we believe are deserving of their token symbol, since it's sort of like giving a refund. Everyone goes through the same process, but then there's a refund that's available for projects that that go through whatever governance processes we establish as a community to allocate the tokens. And that process will prevent scammers from coming in to get the refunds. It'll be transparent. People will understand it. And it doesn't necessarily have to be all done before the token's deployed. For example, even after the contract's deployed, new projects start up, the network could choose to to fund somebody enough to buy some token and allocate it to them through the governance process. But having a simple process that recognizes a principle that these things have value and that need to be allocated on a market basis. If it's not allocated on a market basis, it's being allocated on a political basis. That's really the only two options we have, is market or political. And since we can have a market basis to allocate it, and we can have a political basis for reimbursement, we get the best of both worlds without having to have a bunch of special purpose code and special purpose upfront considerations.
Well, you could also do a third option and do neither of those, and don't make a single centralized token registry at all on the chain. What's the problem with taking the current EOS.io token contract that most people use already, even if they've modified it, some slightly, there's a lot more ways, but take that contract, create a token standard out of it, improve it, add some features that aren't there that are present in ERC20, like an allowance system. That'll fix some of the contract communication headaches that are in EOS without synchronous contract calls. And then you push that, and then it becomes an opt-in system where all these existing token contracts, now they don't have to migrate to EOS.io token if they want to be official. Now
No
they
one
don't
has
have
to
to do
migrate.
all this work. They just redeploy. It's an opt-in thing. They redeploy one contract to upgrade their contract to this, and then that's it. And then we recognize all of those contracts that follow this common standard via token lists on GitHub.
So now you're asking each person to buy the RAM to deploy an identical copy of the code, and then they have to upgrade that every time the network upgrades in order to make sure that they're getting bug fixes and
If they want
maintaining.
to. But no one's going
They
to force them and say that their token symbol is now illegitimate because it's not on a single token registry.
Yes, but tools.
It's going to be a totally opt-in thing, and if a project never does it, then no harm, no foul.
Well, if there are bugs and you never upgrade it, that's a problem. And if there are new features, then we've got a fragmented market space, right? Where some tokens work with the 1.0 standards, some the 2.0, some the 3.0, and all the different tools are updating. It just creates fragmentation. It's still optional, but I want to point out something. If everyone deploys a copy of the contract instead of using the existing contract, then you're just copying the code, and the only thing you've done is you've created an entire namespace of symbols for yourself. But if you try to merge it, where you're not just copying the code, you're merging it into your code, now you've reduced the size of contract you can build, because you got to have all the code for all the token standards now and in the future in your contract. And the liquidity stuff is more challenging to solve. So at the end of the day, you're not really.
This is how Ethereum is set up, and they are working marvelously right now. Like they don't Vitalik isn't pushing some central ERC20 registry where.
I don't think Ethereum's working marvelously. I think they just have a high market cap, and so people assume market cap equals marvelous. It functions, and people are working around it, but it is not pleasant in many respects. It's just familiar, and there's a difference.
So how do you envision the process being for an existing project that wanted to be part of this registry? Let's say Box, for example, if DeFi Box wanted to be part of this registry, what would they need to do on their end as far as modifications?
Well, there are two options that I've considered. Option one is you reserve the symbol on the registry and you just point it to your existing contract. So it's kind of like DNS. This symbol is hosted on this contract, and then that contract would have to implement the full spec. That has some limitations because you wouldn't be able to tap into the same liquidity as easily. If you have an existing token and you want to migrate it to a token hosted in a different contract, the process would be similar to if you wanted to break one contract into two, simply so you can have more code, right? So even if you didn't have this centralized approach, you wanted to have, say you have a DAC and you have your governance code and you have your token code, and they're in two different contracts. You would update your current contract to redeem your current token and issue the new one on the new EOSIO token. And that would be a relatively small addition, like on deposit, then issue. And then you have a one-to-one peg between the two that your contract can maintain. And then you're done. If your contract has a lot of customized code around additional validation on transfers, right? So let's say you're doing all kinds of custom stuff, then you would implement an action or a hook that would be a callback from EOSIO token to your contract, anytime someone transfers. So you could still have the option of maintaining any state you want to maintain and rejecting a transfer if you don't like it for some reason, say accounts blacklisted, or if you want to have a whitelist of accounts. You can still implement all that custom logic by having additional validation within your contract for that type of transfer.
Dan, this sounds like a very good technical idea for developers, like to have one copy of the code, and I actually completely agree with it from a developer's perspective. But for a project that's already established and has liquidity and has custom functionality and has already distributed their keys sufficiently through a DAC or multi-sig that they're happy enough with, it doesn't really seem like there's a big enough of a carrot to draw them into this, unless there's some economic incentive or something to justify the development costs.
Right. So the only reason you would want to bid on a name is if someone else was trying to take the name and spoof your token, you'd want to buy it. So you'd buy it just to prevent abuse and fraud on your name, which is valuable to your current token. Secondly, it's kind of like getting listed on CoinMarketCap. If you want your DAC or application to be discovered, you buy it just to advertise. We're here. We're over here on this other contract. This is the official token symbol. This is the name. This is the website. This is social media, and all that other metadata associated with it. You would buy it just so that you can link it to your existing contract, and reserving the right to optionally support the system contract. Right? You can keep everything as is, and then allow people to bridge over into the EOSIO token for other contracts that want to rely on the trust in the system contract to filter which tokens they accept, so they don't have to whitelist all of the contracts. That's another benefit of this. Any token on EOSIO token developers can rely on is conforming to a specific set of behavior, which means if you're building a decentralized exchange or anything like that, and you're getting deposits, you want to know that the type of token that's being sent to you is actually conforming to the standard and is governed and has certain properties. And so you probably, there's reason to rely on EOSI token and a small whitelist of exceptions rather than having to specifically get your token integrated with every app out there that ever by getting whitelisted. So there's a lot of benefits just reputationally. So you can maintain a dual token system where your existing token managed by your current contract, even though it's still is standard, in order to integrate with future apps like DEXs that want to work with any standard token, you can make a one-to-one peg and have the same symbol in both cases, just managed on two different contracts. So there's lots of reasons to buy it, but because symbols are time delayed, you don't even have to consider spending the money until the day someone decides that they want to call you on it and they're going to try to buy it, and then you have to step up and buy it. And at that point in time, you approach Eden and say, hey, I'm doing all this. Will you sponsor my token for me? Or you go to ENF and ask them to sponsor your token if the bid starts getting too high. And the community would probably come and support you. Alternatively, you could have your token holders crowdfund it for you. There's lots of options here, and I'm not trying to prescribe any one. I'm just trying to say that we are creating value by having this system. And then it's just a matter of allocating that value.
So the value is in the branded trust or the future branded trust of that particular EOSIO token deployed instance, like that particular contract address, and who controls it,
Yes,
I guess.
if you're building an app, all tokens on that address are going to behave in exactly the same way, with the exact same behavior, and you don't have to worry about arbitrary people creating new contracts with code that purports to conform, right? It's sending you the same messages, but might be doing something else. So it's easier to rely on something that you know without having to specifically whitelist everything you want to integrate with.
So as a developer, I get that, and that makes a lot of sense. But I think it's going to, the bigger challenge, given that we've had 3 years where everyone's been deploying the equivalent of their own ERC20 on Ethereum, where there's duplicate, like thousands of copies of the same code. We've been doing that for 3 years. So we've kind of got into a habit of doing that and having to justify ourselves to exchanges and build trust among our communities. So the bigger challenge here might be to tell the story, the non-technical story, to people who aren't possibly as technical to understand how the code works. So they, sell the non-technical story, if you know what I mean.
Yeah. Well, look at it this way. If we go this approach, we can go to exchanges and say, you can list every single one of these tokens without having to do as much due diligence. It's easier to get listed on exchanges if you bridge through the EOS token contract rather than deploying your own code. I think there's tremendous power there.
So one security audit covers all of them.
Correct.
Effectively. Yeah.
Yep.
And that is one of the reasons why you don't see a lot of EOS tokens on other exchanges. Every single EOS token has to be integrated with some custom functionality at the exchange level. Whereas with ERC20s, there's a standard, and that's why you'll see ERC20 tokens on a lot of exchanges get it listed pretty quick after a project launches. It's definitely because of the liquidity and fee generation that they're getting, but there is also a technical side to this. So there's a lot of truth to that.
The ERC20 is, they might have a formal interface to describe that contract, but the EOS.io token clones are effectively the same. It's just perhaps not formalized in action level, but they can be just as security vulnerable in exactly the same way with a custom ERC20 or a custom EOS.io token deployed.
That is correct, Alice.
So yeah, kind of reputation is king here.
And it's not just about integrating with exchanges, it's about integrating with other dApps that want to rely on it. And dApps can't, there's a governance is hard, and having a dApp approve or whitelist other contracts is more error prone than having it say EOS.io token is it. If you interface through this contract, it's already conforming to our minimum requirements, and then we can integrate with it, versus any number of potential security vulnerabilities and corner cases that come up when you allow any token to interface to you. So any token issued on any contract to interface to you.
So what would the formal process be? So if this contract has an inflation parameter built in, when you create your token, you set an inflation parameter to 1%, and then maybe you want to change it to 3% to modify that contract.
It's one way.
What would that process be?
You can decrease the inflation limit, but you can't increase it. It's a way for developers and to make promises with respect to their token that the EOS network's going to enforce. Whereas if they deploy their own code, now you have to trust them not to update their code. But here, now you're trusting the EOS network to enforce the inflation limits that the token issuers voluntarily agreed to in the beginning. So you should probably keep it high initially and then lower it after you're more confident. But those types of things are actually really important for situations where you've got market makers and relays that you don't want some contract updating its code, issuing 1 trillion tokens, and draining a relay with inflation limits in place. relays can rest assured that they can't be drained overnight with the tokens they're listing.
And everyone's pretty quiet. No more questions?
Does this have any impact on the other chains in terms of EOS core code compatibility?
It should be completely backward compatible as far as EOS token transfers. Other chains could potentially deploy this contract, assuming they're using the same EOS token contract as EOS. Obviously, they'd probably change EOS to WAX or whatever it happens to be if they want this type of functionality on their chain. They also have the option of deploying this contract as a new contract that creates a namespace for standardization on their chain without interfering with their existing contract. And EOS has that option as well, but I think it'd be better for the EOS token itself to be just as standard as everyone else. So you don't have, well, EOS is this way, but all of the tokens are something else. But
so what the contract pays, if I deployed a token into this registry, and how do I fund, how are the resources funded to make sure the network's paying the CPU, whether the user's paying for it or not, their CPU being spent? So does the token creator have kind of like a reserve where they put EOS into there and it's spent for the resources on behalf of their users, or how does that work?
Nope, there's going to be a pay fee action that can be embedded in the transaction. So it's just be like Bitcoin or any other network out there. You pay a fee, and that fee can be in the currency you're transferring. So even if you're transferring glue tokens, you don't have to have EOS in order to transfer. You can just transfer the glue tokens, and the contract would automatically convert the glue tokens to EOS through the built-in liquidity provider. The resulting EOS would be used to automatically lease the resources necessary to complete the transaction without the user having to think about renting resources or doing anything special. It would be up to the wallets to add the fee to the transaction, but it'd behave just like every other blockchain. And if you don't want to do that, your other option is to lease resources and continue using it just like it works today. So we're adding an option for transact by fee. If you didn't have a fee, then you'd have transaction spamming, and we can't have that. So it's either you rent the resources and you manage it yourself, or you pay a fee and the contract will pay for all those things. And EOS benefits either way because whatever token you're in will be sold for the EOS to cover the fee automatically.
I do like that. So it'd be equivalent to if I have a bunch of Chainlink tokens on ETH, but I don't have any ETH in my account, I'm kind of screwed. I have no funds for gas. And in this case, you could use whatever the token is as the gas token for the transfer.
Yep. That's one of the benefits of combining the Bancor liquidity with the token contract in the same contract as the EOS token, because you can do all those Bancor calculations really easily without having to do inline actions and calling other contracts in order to take care of the fees.
How would that system work?
One extra thing, caveat here. One second, John. I'll get back to you. The fee that we charge would lease enough CPU and net so that we didn't have to worry about any other inline actions or anything else, right? It's not just the CPU cost here, but if it's embedded in a bigger transaction or it's notifying some contract that's then going to do a bunch of, CPU burning, mining type stuff, it doesn't matter what else you do. If you consume the entire block with CPU, the transaction fee on these transfers, if you're using pay fee, would be sufficient to cover any eventuality and still be profitable for the network. Which means if you're using pay fee, you're going to be paying more than if you use the rental model, but it's pay as you go and it's simpler. And it's still going to be far cheaper than any fees you see on any other network. All right, John, what was your question?
Oh, I was just wondering how other types of actions that are not token transfers would be handled under that system.
Well, under this system, anyone could add a pay fee action to their transaction and have all the CPU net covered for that transaction, regardless of anything else going on. So it is completely flexible to work with anything. Then the only thing you have to worry about is RAM, and a properly designed contract should be designed in such a way that there's not unlimited RAM allocation, or that there's EOS earned enough to cover the purchase of the RAM necessary in a transparent kind of manner, so users don't have to think about RAM. If I had to do it over again, I would completely eliminate the concept of user-provided RAM and force contracts to pay for the RAM and come up with an economic model to collect the EOS necessary to buy the RAM that they need. But I'm building a complex stack with voting and lots of RAM usage, and I'm not going to ask anyone to pay for RAM. With respect to tokens, the RAM problem is solved by having a minimum balance requirement. And so you either have 0, freeze the RAM, or the minimum balance, which you're basically staking for RAM, which is equivalent to buying them and then selling the RAM when you're done. So a minimum balance requirement solves that problem for tokens. And then it's like application specific thing. So for example, if you're implementing something like Violet Garden with voting, you would limit the number of active votes a person can have and the length of time you need to store the record of the vote, and so forth. Or something like Eden, you have there are other ways that you can implement limits that are natural for your application that the users don't really see. And if they want to increase those limits for whatever reason, then they can pay a premium, buy EOS, pay a fee for your service, and now you provide more service to them. Kind of like the rest of the internet works. The website owner pays Amazon for hosting. They don't expect the user to buy hosting services in order to interact with them. And I think we need to get to the point where contracts are written in such a way so that users don't have to worry about how much RAM do I have available? Is this contract going to store something in my RAM? If it does, how do I delete it? All those questions disappear when people think about their smart contracts differently.
Well, the disadvantage of the Web2 AWS model is that someone stops paying the bill and then everyone loses access. So what's the difference here under this system?
Well, in theory, anyone can buy RAM on behalf of someone else, and anyone can lease resources on behalf of someone else. So if the current contract owner decides to stop providing resources, some other entrepreneur can come up and offer it. You've got free transactions via the Anchor Fuel wallet. So there's lots of ways to get resources to unblock an application. But I think you'd want to carefully review the code of whatever contract you're interacting with, or if you're going to invest a lot of time and money into integrating with, to make sure that it has a sustainable model for resource usage built into it.
Dan?
Is it going to be possible for contracts to read resource values?
That would require a hard fork.
It
There
seems
is
if we're moving in this direction where the contracts are going to handle more responsibility, then that would be a great feature to have.
Yeah. Back when I was at Block.one, we had a EOS improvement proposal designed that would allow contracts to review the CPU usage and and do custom accounting and do a whole bunch of things. I think that would be a great idea for a Mandel 4 or something like that. But it is far more involved to handle resources with that type of system than the approaches that are available today.
Yeah, could this system work outside the EOS.io token contract? And have you actually considered deploying on a different contract and trying to get recognition and establishment by, you know, market competition?
It can work, and it could even, I guess, be assigned to block producers to govern it. But you wouldn't want to assign something to block producers unless they chose to take responsibility for it. If the block producers aren't willing to take responsibility for it, then somebody else has to take responsibility for it. And I think it's best done in as decentralized manner as possible, given the sensitivity of all things tokens.
Yeah, sure, but that's something you could actually do without, you know, seeking community, you know, permission or confirmation.
Yeah, it's definitely possible. I think a lot of the value of the symbol system in particular is derived from the fact that it's official, and a lot of the value of being official is that the EOS token is no different than any other token, which puts everyone on the same playing field. If you do this as a separate contract, then EOS is on a different playing field than everyone else. And there's different governance and different everything. People know that if there's a bug with the EOS token, that block producers are going to fix it. And when they fix it, they'll fix all tokens. But if it's on a different contract, then block producers aren't as motivated to fix the code. So there's some alignment of interests that are achieved by putting on the same contract as the EOS.io token.
I'm just thinking, you've mentioned the Bancor algorithm exchange, which would be useful, but I'm just trying to think if there's other functionalities that could be added to this system EOS.io token contract, which is only available in that. And one possible thing could be this contract could be a privileged contract and therefore could be able to do things that other EOS.io token contracts can't do. And the contrived example could be like on ERC20 tokens, where you can authorize or pre-approve an ERC20 or a contract to withdraw tokens from another account. I'm not saying that's a necessarily good thing. It's probably a terrible thing, but it's the only example I can think of where you could possibly enable this token contract to be able to do effectively direct debits from someone's account without having to get authorization for each and every transaction, because it could be a privileged contract. Have you thought about that sort of thing?
There's all kinds of things. Right now, the token contract is not privileged, and it's not privileged by design. It could be made privileged. But yeah, anything that it has a monopoly on, it's in the EOS.io namespace. That's one thing, right? So that's one thing that's special that other people can't have. So yeah, there's all kinds of things you can do to add value. And when you deploy your contract through there, it means when you use EOS.io token contract to manage your token, you're automatically going to be kept in sync with network standards and security. And I think that's a value proposition in its own right. All right, everyone, this has been a good chat. I got to go.